Thanks, Ed. I will be brief because Ed made me. I could be up here for a half hour, but I know Bill won't let me in monitoring our time. Okay. I'm just going to do a brief overview. Some of it I'll go through quickly because Barbara and Ed kind of touched on it. But basically, I'm going to take you through a brief history of the Death with Dignity initiative. As Ed mentioned, Death with Dignity is now legal in 5 states. Oregon was the first in 1997, and as Ed said, California is the most recent, passing it last year. These 5 states passed a Death with Dignity law through different means. Oregon and Washington was through a voter initiative. California and Vermont was via legislation, and as Ed mentioned, Montana was through a court decision. As of last year, an additional 23 states have taken at least some legislative steps toward legalization, including North Carolina. Okay, now I'm going to show you a couple of charts. I made them as simple as possible. I know everybody could question numbers, but I happen to be married to a statistician, so all my numbers were thoroughly checked, so I just like to say that, okay? In addition to these efforts, at least half the adult population in this country appeared to accept physician-assisted suicide. Gallup does a lot of polls, as we know, and in a Gallup poll conducted over the past several years, over 50% of people felt that doctors should be allowed to assist terminal patients who are in severe pain to end their lives. There is some evidence in the past few years of an increase in that acceptance. Now we're going to move to Oregon, and I know there are a lot of words on this page, but the point I really want to make is that it was a challenging and deliberate process characterized by determined opposition. It also started with a grassroots effort of 3 people, a nurse, a physician, and actually a strategist. The act passed in 1994, but it was held up for several years by attempts to overturn it. In 1997, it actually went back to the voters, and this was the first time since 1908 an action was initiated to overturn the will of the Oregon voters. It not only passed, but it passed by a wider margin than the initial effort. Even after that, there were several proposed actions by congressional opponents to obstruct the Oregon law. The final attempt to block it was initiated by the then Attorney General John Ashcroft. Ashcroft's directive ended up in the Supreme Court in the case Gonzalez v. Oregon, in which the legality of the act was upheld. Okay. Similarly, in California, passage of a Death with Dignity law was not a simple process. Some milestones of support happened along the way, but the California voters defeated the first initiative in 1992. Not by much, but it was defeated. Subsequent measures were either stalled or failed in the state legislature. The bill passage in 2015 is attributable to several developmental factors. The 17 years of data in Oregon, the shifting perceptions of our population on death with dignity, the moving story of Brittany Menard, the 20-year-old woman suffering from brain cancer who went to Oregon to end her life with dignity, and obviously the efforts of Compassion and Choices. Okay, I'm briefly going to go over some of the key safeguards in both the Oregon and the California bill. In fact, California has added additional safeguards that were not included in the Oregon bill. The patient must be able to make and convey healthcare decision. California even goes a little further in this detail. The patient must have been diagnosed by attending physician as terminal with 6 months or less to live. It must be confirmed by a consulting physician. If necessary, an assessment of the patient's mental competency occurs. The patient must be informed of all alternatives, including hospice. And the doctor must tell the patient that, at a few points actually, that his or her decision is rescindable. In terms of the process, as we kind of alluded to earlier, the patient must make 2 oral requests at least 15 days apart, plus a written request with 2 witnesses attesting that it's a voluntary action and that the patient is of sound mind. In Oregon, if the patient is in a long-term care facility, one of the witnesses must be from that facility. California requires a final attestation form for the patient to fill out within 48 hours of self-administration of the lethal medication. And in all these states, if there's any sense of undue influence on the patient towards accepting this option, it's considered a Class A felony. Okay, here's a chart. It's not as complicated as it looks. Let me see, where's my notes? Okay, today in Oregon, over the past 18 years, 1,545 prescriptions for a lethal medication were written, and 991 patients used the prescription. So as Barbara mentioned, this translates to about 2/3 of terminal patients who received the prescription actually filled it and then took it. Let's briefly go over these people, these 991 who elected this option. The median age is 71. There's an even gender split between male and female. They're predominantly white, well-educated, 91% enrolled in hospice. The majority were diagnosed and suffered from cancer and would have died of cancer. In the primary end of life concerns, and there's a whole list, but again, I'm hitting the top line here, was loss of autonomy, less able to engage in life. And on the other end of the spectrum, financial concerns were rarely cited. Only 3% of 991 people mentioned financial concerns. And as my statistician husband told me, that translates to 30 people. So again, there's a brief, very brief overview, and I think I'm within my time, Ed?
Very good, yes.
Thank you very much.